right, let's do this. So Billy, will you take a look at the chat questions and throw them my way? I'll come back to you every once in a while. But John, you were first. Let's do it.
All right, so I have a question that ties into yesterday's kind of happiness email, as
Yes.
well as the Daily Stoic email that went out today.
Okay.
And it regards to really the real, like I see a theme running behind Stoicism is objectivity versus subjectivity, and particularly in terms of controlling what you can control and controlling your reactions. And the line that struck me from today's email is what you were saying about what somebody actually says versus what you hear, where the problem is there, what's the actual problem there. So I'm just wondering what kind of strategies or tips do you have for situations like that?
Yeah, I think we had an email a few years back from that was about a quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where someone was asking about her secret to 50 years of marriage or whatever. And she said that her mother or mother-in-law had told her when she got married, she said, in a long marriage, it helps to be a little bit deaf. And meaning that what I take that to mean, and I think it pertains in the wider scope to Stoicism, if you want to be happy, if you want to be undisturbed, part of this is about just ignoring some of the things that are happening around you. If you've got too sort of fine of an antenna, you're going to pick up a lot of stuff that inevitably is going to upset you, make you angry. And I think so for me, this is like sort of about my news. I would say this is your news diet. This is, sort of who do you spend time with? Where do you live? Sort of shaping the worldview that you have to the degree that that is in your control goes a long way towards, being conducive to happiness or serenity or peace.
Perfect. That's a great answer. Is there any books you could recommend on that topic?
I like the Cal Newport book, Digital Minimalism. I think that's great. Let me see about information diet. What would I like? I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where I'm not sure if there's like a book that teaches you how to do. I don't have a great recommendation, but let me think more about that. But okay. I do like that mantra, sort of garbage in, garbage out. Sort of how you shape your world, what your influences are, what brings, what you bring into your life. It determines how happy you're going to be.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Veronica.
Hello.
Hi.
This is so exciting. Well, I'm completely newbie on Stoic, so thank you so much for everything.
Of course.
It's actually a little bit related with the previous questions. So I lead a very big team, and I also teach, so I have tons of students, and a lot of them are very fixed mindset, right?
Yeah.
So from the learnings of today is like, we should only focus on what we can control. I completely understand the concept, but how can I help others to walk the path of stop being so fixed mindset when you want to explore creativity, right? And you need, to be in a more creative space.
Yeah, so obviously the Carol Dweck book, Growth Mindset, is fantastic. I think growth mindset is one. I think the concept itself is helpful, right? Just to understand that there's such a thing as a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. I think even that concept teaches you something. The other word that I like, and this is sort of a theme in my book Conspiracy, but it's certainly going to be something I'm talking about in my next book. I love this idea of agency, right? How do you believe that you have agency or no? And that might be a weird concept coming from the Stoics, because so much of what the Stoics talk about is sort of resigning. There's the idea of acquiescence or assent, sort of how do you assent to the things that are outside your control. And so, yes, the Stoics did believe that there was some areas of life that were fixed, but I think they were very, very focused on where they did have agency and sort of using that agency to the best of their ability. And I feel like it's impossible to be a creative person or an artist or a creator of any kind if you don't have belief in agency, because otherwise, one, what is the point? But two, how do you actually do the thing? It's all about taking the raw materials that exist around you or that you've been given and deciding to make use of them in some way, that you have, as constrained as you are, even if you were an artist in the Soviet Union, believing that you have agency over these characters on the page and that you're gonna make something of that. To me, I think one of the alarming trends of today's world is, as we focus on these things which do exist, systemic injustices, systemic problems, history, the sort of intersecting forms of oppression or what have you. All this stuff exists, but it also, runs right into the other trend of we've never had more agency or freedom than we do right now. And so are you focused on where you don't have agency, or are you focused on where you do have agency? To me, that's the defining question, both of an individual's life, but also of a creator's life.
Very cool. Thank you so much.
Of course. Todd, what's up? Good to see you again.
Likewise, brother. So I decided to focus on today's email I got sent out.
Yeah.
Strategies for success. And I stumbled on do your own thing. Because that was like an ongoing, one I was thinking about. So 2 ideas that stem my question for today. It's for you and Billy, actually.
Okay.
So I was reminded of Seneca when he got exiled, but he got sent back.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks he's a hypocrite. Like, why did you teach Nero? Because he ended up killing him.
Sure.
And, to dive into context, what I think why he did that, because it started with his own conviction, is because I believe his reverence for God, why he got exiled back, not exiled back, but returned back, is because God gave him that freedom. And so that was my first idea. And then the second idea was the Matthew McConaughey selfish, your selfish conviction kind of stems that outer consensus. So my question is, based on your own experiences, what is your definition of success living by these Stoic virtues?
Yeah, I did an article a few months back where I sort of said that my definition of success is autonomy, like how much sort of control do I have over the direction of my own life. So Seneca and I might disagree there, in that he seemed to sort of see success as sort of being at the center of things, right? Yeah. I would argue that Seneca's best contributions came not working for Nero, but the writing that he did, in the period of exile. But I also understand that different people have different callings, and it may well have been that he felt like, look, what I'd personally rather do is, stay here and write and be a philosopher. But if I don't take this job, somebody else worse will do it. Right. And I think that's sort of what kept Seneca going, probably longer than he should have, some sense of almost a sort of an obligation, or that he was almost trapped by it. When I think about success, I think about, am I doing what I feel like I was meant to do, or am I doing it or doing things in a way that is because it's how everyone else is doing it, right? So to me, the idea of that autonomy is not just like, hey, am I in control of my schedule or not? But it's like, how in control of my own destiny am I, right? So I want to be able to write, but I also want to be able to write the books that I want to write. So let's say I was selling 5 times as many books, but I had much less control over what was in those books because a publisher decided, or because the market decided, or the trends decided. I would view that as actually being less successful than I am now. So that, but I do think, whether it's Seneca or Marcus Aurelius, there is this sense, and maybe it's sort of a distinctly Roman idea, maybe it's actually very inspiring, that they were sort of taken their life was taken in a direction that perhaps they didn't want to go, but they felt obligated to go for the sake of the common good. Do you know what I mean? And that's why they call it public service, right? It's service. You're in service of something larger than oneself. And to a certain degree, Seneca did that. To another degree, when you really get into it, it looks like he was also sort of enriching himself. So it's hard to know why he was doing it.
Yeah.
But great question. Maria.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Fun fact, I was able to go to the Painted Porch bookstore over the weekend, and it's
amazing.
Awesome. So
thank you. And I love your shirt.
Oh, thank you. I know you like Yes Theory too. You're on their podcast. So my question was, I was reading Lives of the Stoic, and I noticed a passage where it compared Seneca to saying as if Emerson had also been a philosopher, a writer, a politician. Yes. And in today's email, it was, comparing or just saying how Seneca was also a playwright. Zeno was a merchant. And so all these people had other trades that they worked with. So where I'm struggling is kind of finding a middle ground between maybe David Epstein's range, where you should dabble in a lot of things, and then Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, because a lot of us have so many interests, not just in work, but in life, and how you juggle all of that.
So two things. So I had David on the podcast, and I think it's worth listening to. I love that book. There's also a handful of really good interviews with David and Malcolm, where they sort of talk through their differences together, which they're like running buddies, which I think is hilarious. So I think it's a balance, right? If you're sort of only specialized in one thing, it makes you sort of you can be very good at it, but you're also sort of very fragile and vulnerable, and you lack context. If you're doing a million things, you're lacking the ability to really get good at any of those things. When I look at Seneca, I see, sort of being a politician, being a writer, and being a politician, being a philosopher, and being a playwright as distinct but interrelated areas that were making. So his experiences in the real world at the height of Rome's power and influence is obviously informing his understanding of the philosophy, just as the philosophy is informing his sort of obligations as a politician. Then I would say on top of that, when you read his plays, it's very clear to me that what Seneca is talking about in those plays are things that he's not free to talk about literally in his writing. So it's almost as if the plays were an outlet for what he's seeing and witnessing that he couldn't express in any other medium. So I guess it's not like he was a playwright and doing some completely unrelated thing, that all the tasks are feeding into each other in some way. So I think if you can get a synergy going, it's better than if you're doing things that are diametrically opposed to each other.
So it's okay to do things kind of like in season, not everything at the same time.
I think that's right. And then I guess the other thing to look at with Seneca would be, where did he do those things at different phases in his life? A lot of his philosophical writings come after he's been exiled from politics, right? And even his plays, again, seem to be things that he thought were important, but didn't have the ability to speak about, because Nero was such a tyrant, that his plays were a way to sort of get those ideas out in the world, as opposed to just being a totally ridiculous, unrelated, side project.
Awesome. No, this is great stuff to think about. Thank you.
Yeah. Edward.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks so much. Big fan of your work. So this parallels, I think, with today's email regarding success. And also in the sense of learning the philosophy versus the daily application of the philosophy. And since obviously we have you in the spotlight, I'd like to ask, where do you feel yourself as a practitioner, and obviously someone who probably knows this better than most people that walk the earth, where do you really struggle? Where do you really feel like you fall short? And I, like you, am a father of, I've actually got a 6-year-old and just turned 8-year-old girl. So I'm walking that path, myself. So I know that's probably in there somewhere.
No,
but,
I would say that.
Share some of that with us.
Yeah, I'd say that's certainly at the top of the list. I don't think anyone who studies philosophy is then batting 100% with those ideas when you have kids, especially little kids. So yeah. And this again, I think goes to the point of like let's say you study philosophy and then you decide to live this kind of monkish life where you don't have any responsibilities, you don't have any kids, you don't have relationships. In some respects that makes the philosophy easier because you're not being challenged. At the same time, it makes a lot of the ideas kind of worthless because they're not actually rooted in any real experiences. And it makes it very hard for you to communicate these ideas with other people because again, you don't exist in the same reality, the same shared experiences as most people. So I would say, yeah, certainly kids. And then where with kids, probably being present, I would say, is a struggle. And then temper / sort of patience are probably the biggest challenges. And I was just working on something pertaining to Marcus Aurelius, and the writer was noting that the theme of getting angry appears so many times in meditations that it's impossible not to assume that Marcus Aurelius had a temper, right? And so I think it is important to note that the Stoics were not perfect, and perhaps the things they talked about most were the things that they were worst at. And you could probably deduce that from my writing as well. Anything you see that I'm talking about over and over again, you could kind of safely assume I'm talking about my own struggles with that same thing. Because what I think you're really doing with Stoicism is you're trying to get your own thoughts, your own beliefs, your own principles sort of restated in as clear a form as possible. And it's in that way, it's like a reminder. Okay, like here's who I want to be. Here's how I want this to go. And then you're dealing with a grouchy 4-year-old who's running around like a crazy person. How can you actually sort of get those two things as aligned as possible? That's the struggle that we're all in, for sure.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Billy, let's do some of the chat ones and then we'll come back.
Alrighty. Joel asked about the Stoics' take on the law of attraction and
yes.
Creating as opposed to reacting and accepting life as it is. Understands that the secret is unrealistic, but I do think there's something to the quantum field.
Yeah.
I guess maybe just not enough information about this at the known time.
So there is a line in Meditations that maybe if you were really looking for confirmation of the law of attraction, which, the law of attraction, as I understand it, is that like attracts like. What we think about, what we spend time sort of manifesting, what you put on a vision board, you're helping create into reality. So when Marcus Aurelius says our life is dyed by the color of our thoughts, it might seem like he's talking about the law of attraction. I would very much disagree with that idea. And Billy, we have that piece that I wrote that I think would be worth linking to, the one on sort of manifesting. The Stoics believe that our perceptions mattered, of course. And when Marcus is saying that our life is dyed by our thoughts, I think he means like, if you're a depressive, pessimistic, negative person, you're going to see everything pessimistically and negatively. If you're a cynical person, you're going to see a lot to be cynical about. That doesn't have anything to do with what actually happens. And in fact, Marcus even talks about, when he talks about sort of meditating on death, he says, you're not tempting fate. You're not manifesting death by thinking about death. You're quite the contrary. By thinking about death, you're creating a better life. To be flip about it, I think the law of attraction is horseshit. I think it's sort of propagated by people who realize that it's a lot easier to sell books if you tell people what they want to hear rather than tell them the truth. And in the article, I tell this funny story about, I'm forgetting her name, but the woman who popularized the law of attraction in The Secret several years ago, she was selling her mansion in Santa Barbara. It's like a $20 million mansion, which should give you some perspective on how much money there is in telling people that what they want to hear. Anyways, she lists the mansion for $20 million. It doesn't sell. So she relisted at 18, she relisted at 17. It ends up selling for like $11 million. And a reporter asked her, and I think this is the point. He goes, if the law of attraction was real, why didn't you just manifest that your house would sell for full listing price, right? The point being, our thoughts don't make reality, but our thoughts do inform the actions that we're likely to take. So the Stoics were big on the discipline of perception, how we see things, but that's kind of where the law of attraction ends things. The most important discipline for the Stoics is the discipline of action, what you actually do, and that's I think what's going to be the most important. Darren, what do you got?
Hey, so today's email is about success, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think around 2018, I read Obstacles Away, and in that book, he had a chapter called Seizing the Opportunity or Looking for the Opportunity, something like that. And you also had a portion in Perennial Seller when you said that multiple companies sort of look for these new trends and they try to jump at it almost immediately, right? And so my question is, when is it a good time to be the first in a growing trend? For example, like right now, a growing industry is cryptocurrencies, blockchain, those stuff. So when is it good to be the first, and when is it like harmful?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a great rule of when it's better to be first or whatever. What I'm trying to say there, and a friend of mine wrote a book with this title where he said, what is it? It only is better than best, right? And that's the way to think about it. So sure, sometimes in a business competition, you want to be first, sometimes you want to be best, but ideally you want to be the only one. You want to create a unique value proposition, a unique combination that has never existed and likely never will exist, right? So I might say let's skip that your question entirely and think instead, how do we focus, as Peter Thiel says, where we have a monopoly, where we're the only one doing it, the only one that can do it. So that would just be something to think about. I would say generally, though, it's better to be best than first. But it's always better to be the only one. Grecia, did I say that right? Hi.
Hi. I have a question about is there a Stoic way to make a decision, or do the Stoics have something to say about decision making?
What do you mean exactly?
So I think many times we're kind of on the fence about things, and I wonder if there's something to be said about getting off the fence in a Stoic way.
So I actually have a chapter about this in the book that I'm writing right now. There's General Marshall, who's sort of a hero of mine. He would famously sort of preside over these long meetings where people were debating all these things. And he would sort of say, don't fight the problem, decide the problem. Basically, just like you decide it and you move on, right? I think a lot of times when we're making the decision, we're thinking like, is this option better? Is this option better? And what never seems to enter our calculus is what is the cost of delaying the decision, right? So, it may have been that deciding one of the options sooner and then just acting on it would be better than waiting for the more information. So I tend to be someone who tries to make the decision quickly and move on. Although just this week, there was this decision and I sort of agonized over it and I went back and forth. I ended up going with what I originally was going to do anyway. I should just trusted my gut on it. I just sort of put myself through the ringer for like 3 days for no reason, that honestly, I could have just decided and used that energy to make sure that the decision that I made was the right one, So I would like to think generally that the Stoics were quick decision makers. And then once they made it, they stuck with it.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah. Hazel or Hazen. Sorry, Hazen.
Hazen, yeah, that's it. Thanks, Ryan. Question for this goes back to day 7's notes, I believe, where you contrasted Buddhist with Stoicist.
Yes.
And I was wondering, that's kind of how it led me to Stoicism as far as studying Buddhist and whatnot. And I was wondering if there's any other cultures out there that was having the same sort of virtuous talks and whatnot.
Yes.
And my question is there any historical evidence that shows there was any communication between the two groups?
Yeah, there's not, as far as I can see. There's like, there was an Atlantic piece I read a few years ago that was like, maybe David Hume gets, this Buddhist text, and like we don't really know when this stuff starts to make it into Western thought, but almost certainly not around the time of the Stoics. I almost like it better that way, because it means they were independently coming to the same conclusion. If you found that the two philosophies had influenced each other early on, it would almost negate some of the conclusions that they come to. The fact that East and West both come to the conclusion that, our unhappiness rests so much on our expectations, on our inability to be satisfied, that our fear of death is this sort of universal thing. Like, I like that the species co-evolved independently, right? There were definitely other schools. I mean, if you read the Bhagavad Gita, you get a lot of overlap. But to go to my point, it's like when you read Christian thought, there's a lot of overlap between the Christians and the Stoics, at least the early Christians. But that's because they were both in Rome, and they were both sort of utilizing a lot of the same source material, a lot of the same assumptions. So in that sense, it's really hard to separate the two, sort of decide what's a new conclusion, what's just a previous understanding, dressed up in new clothes. So I kind of like that they were separated.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Eric.
Me?
Yes.
Hey, Ryan.
Oh, shit. We got two Erics. Let's do Eric with a C, and then we'll do Eric with a K.
Cool.
All right, Eric with a C, you're up.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Really excited to talk to you here.
Yes.
I just finished part 1 of Stillness is the Key last night.
Okay.
When you talk about accessing stillness as a fly fisherman and a cyclist, that really resonated with me.
I can see the bike behind you.
But oh yeah. But to access it in the office and to get deeper into, my professional life, it seemed like there's a little bit of transcendental meditation going on in there. Do you have any techniques you could talk about with access to stillness? And regarding TM, which I learned from your buddy Tim Ferriss, or learned about, do you believe it's worth paying to learn, or are there other techniques you'd recommend?
So a big part of the book for me was to talk about stillness and not talk about meditation. Just because I feel like it's not something I fully understand. It's not something that's really worked for me. And I also kind of dislike that it's like, oh, okay, so the thing to do to get this is, I think there's a lot of things that contribute to getting to that place of stillness. And certainly it's not something the Stoics talk about. So it don't make it a focus of the book. To me, it's, I think the way you get there in the office is about routine. It's about limiting interruptions. It's about sort of locking into what you're doing. And I think it's also, quite frankly, it's about actually liking what you're doing too. So could I get into a flow state, reviewing spreadsheets? Possibly, but almost certainly not, given that I don't like spreadsheets. You know what I mean? But I could get into it. I could get into a flow state, writing a book in the middle of a crowded coffee shop during an earthquake, because I actually like that, right? And so, I think basically the premise of the book is that sort of mind, body, spirit. There's decisions that you make in each of those domains that either preclude the possibility of stillness or encourage / inspire the ability to get to a place of stillness.
Sure. And does playing music in the background have any impact on that?
It does for me. Yeah. I tend to, I like to write while I'm listening to music, but I tend to pick songs and I listen to those songs over and over and over again. So it sort of creates kind of a loop. And then I'm sort of kind of listening to the music, but I'm really not listening to the music. Kind of lets me turn my mind off.
Okay, great. So stillness and silence are not the same.
I would say stillness and silence are related, but it doesn't have to be. Silence can, I guess I would say silence can come in many forms. I think silence is, I would say, sort of the absence of undesired noise.
Got it.
Literally.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Let's do the other.
Thank you.
Sweet. So my question is really focused on that magic word, enough.
Yes.
And that idea of, waking up every day and realizing that you're doing the work of a human being. And I am the kind of guy that wakes up and decides to get after it, and to a point where it's been brought to my attention that I get consumed by it at times and I have trouble relaxing. Can you just kind of shed some wisdom and maybe discuss work-life balance and just knowing when to kind of turn off and be present with people, not necessarily ideals that you're striving for?
So one of the things that I've taken from the time that I've spent with sports teams is the importance of recovery, right? There's an off season. There's also recovery inside games. They rest pitchers, the load management, as they talk about in the NBA. I've had to start thinking seriously about what are my plans for my career? Am I planning to do this for a short period of time, or am I planning to do this for a long period of time? So is this a sprint or a marathon? And if it's a sprint, then it's all out and there's no balance. It's inherently an unbalanced pursuit. But if it's a marathon, then it's about pacing, right? What's the sustainable way that you do this so you can you can travel the distance that you need to travel? And when you look at a lot of athletes, what causes the injury? Whether it's Tiger Woods or Michael Phelps, whether we're talking a physical injury or sort of mental or spiritual injuries, a lot of it comes from overexertion, overdoing it, a lack of balance. So I think about that sort of rest, recovery, pacing oneself as weirdly as a function of the drive. If you want to be good at this, and if you want to do it for a long time, you better learn restraint or temperance, as the Stoics say, or you're going to burn out before you possibly get there. But great question.
Great answer. Thank you very much.
Mariana.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes.
So I found you through Professor Galloway, and it's been great. I've been listening to your podcast every morning for the last couple of months, and it's
amazing.
Amazing. Thank you so much for what you do. So I'm struggling with two concepts. What you call the obstacle is the way. It's something that I can actually relate to and incorporate. So whatever it is, you make it part of your journey or whatever situation you're in. But then I heard you talking about the concept of amor fati.
Yes.
That's something that is actually new to me. I've never heard of that before. And I'm actually struggling with that. It's like I can make the obstacle part of the way, but just get to the point to love the obstacle, it's really hard for me.
Yeah, there was something I just saw. Let me read this to you. Let me find it here. I thought this was beautiful. I'm gonna reference the Robin Waterfield translation we've been talking about, but let me find this here.
Sure.
Sorry. Where is it? He's talking about this for the Stoics. This idea of amor fati is really important because it's not just that you accept it. I thought it was quite beautiful. If I can't find it, I will try to do it from memory, but I thought it was worth finding. Okay. This is Meditations 5:8. He says, there are two reasons then why you should gladly accept whatever happens to you. First, because the experience happened to you, was prescribed for you, was the product of a web somehow woven just for you way back in time, out of the most ancient causes. Second, because for the directing principle of the universe, even what happens to each of us as individuals plays a part in its advancement, perfection, and that by Zeus, its very preservation. So this is what Robin Waterfield says in his annotation. He says, because there is an unending chain of cause and effect since time began, what happens to you today has been ordained since the beginning of time. So I thought that was quite, so when we think about amor fati, it's not just like, hey, I'm going to figure out a way to muddle through this and make the most of it. It's that think of everything that led up to where you are right now. Thousands of years of history. You know, you've got the planets behind you. Think of the Big Bang creating, you know, even this moment, like, so billions and billions of years of seemingly unrelated events. We're actually working in beautiful concert with each other to bring about what has just happened, even if that thing is tragic or frustrating or obnoxious or unraveling something that you yourself had worked very hard on, right? So the Stoics did have this sense of like that there was some sort of higher power guiding things along, which I think is helpful to understand it. But to me, the idea is, hey, something led up to this. I'm not sure I am even capable of comprehending all of it, so I'm going to go with it, right? I think that's part one. The other thing with this idea of, so there's another part in Meditations where Marcus says, look, a fire consumes what you throw in front of it. He says, but a small fire, like if you had a small flame and you just threw a log on top of it, it would put the fire out, right? It would squash it. But if it was a strong fire, it would turn that into fuel, right? So that, to me, the obstacle is the way, or I'm just going to accept this. That's kind of like small fire, right? But amor fati is like this big fire. This is like, it doesn't matter what this is. I'm going to turn this into something that's great. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. And did you have another question? Or
no,
just one?
That's it.
All right.
Thank you.
Let's see. Billy, any other questions from the chat we should do?
Yes, I forget who asked. I'm looking to the chat here, but the question was about Stoicism and determinism. And then there's also stuff in the Slack about Sam Harris on free will and the overlap between sort of his message and what the Stoics would say about that.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we were just going over that in the amor fati question. Is there anything else?
There's another one about that recent Mark Manson article that I think you've read.
Yes.
About how he's not a Stoic and the overlap between Stoicism and existentialism.
Yeah. So I thought Mark's piece was good. He's a friend of mine. I love his stuff. I know we've had him on the podcast, and I think we did a text interview or two before. So I love Mark. It's totally fine that we would disagree about some stuff. When I look at the existentialists versus the Stoics, to me, the pretty simple test is like, who did more for humanity, right? When I look at some of these modern schools, I see them as having some interesting questions, right? I think Camus is fascinating and poses some good questions. But to me, the sort of the deciding sort of vote for the Stoics is that these were like real people who did things in the real world. And if everyone was an existentialist, I'm not sure where that would leave us. Yeah, someone made the distinction here between pen and ink philosophers and practicing philosophers, and I think that's well said. Let's do Steve Bryant. Did you have a question, or am I accidentally calling on you? Sorry, it's hard to see here. All right, no question. Kristen Avery.
Hey, Ryan.
Hi.
Question about routine and breaking out of it. This is something I kind of experienced last year, not having, like, going from kind of having an opportunity outside of the pandemic, pre-lockdown, to break routines. I'm very like routine and habit focused. So I was wondering, and I don't know, I'm trying to think of like Stoic references to this about, being able to seek out new things and kind of, break out of your comfort zone, even if you're very consistent and all that. So
totally. I think one of the problems with routine is that it can sort of become almost like dogma. It can make you very rigid, and it can almost be like a form of OCD. You're like, this is the way I do things. This is how I prevent the world from collapsing. And then, if I don't do this thing by 7 o'clock, like the whole world will end, which is obviously, if the point of routine is that it should make you more productive and more resilient, not more fragile and more sort of dependent. So two things that have been helpful for me. One, having kids was great because it just sort of blows your life apart. And, the idea that you're in control of the day sort of gets shattered very quickly. And one of the things that came out of that for me was the idea of like routines, plural, versus routine. So like when and I guess I'd already figured this out, but it's like when I travel, I have a different routine than I do at home. At home, I sort of know how the day is likely to begin or end, so I can sort of organize things accordingly. When I'm traveling, usually you don't. So it's like, I know I have to say like run in the morning because I probably won't get time to do that in the afternoon. So I like the idea of having different routines that I sort of default to depending on how things go, right? So it's like, if your routine is like, hey, this is what I do in the morning and it's weather dependent, obviously you have to have another routine if you wake up and it's snowing. So I think the idea of thinking about routines, plural, has been good. The other thing I might think about is just like, I remember I was reading about an NFL kicker who he was not only not superstitious, he was actively on guard from preventing superstitions from happening. So it's like, if he wore a pair of socks and he had like a couple good games in a row, he would like get rid of those socks. So so those didn't become his lucky socks, right? And so I guess what I'm saying is that sometimes I try to think like, okay, what do I normally do as part of my routine? And now I'm going to do it deliberately the other way, so I don't become addicted to only having it my way. Like, I remember like for instance, like before I write, or like give a talk, like I like to like sort of start the day like showering and shaving, because like I just feel fresher that way. But what if the plane arrives, what if I'm on a red-eye flight and I have to go straight to the thing, right? Well, I won't have the opportunity to do that. So when that happens, I'm practicing the opposite of the routine just to prove to myself that the routine doesn't actually matter. There is no superpower in, flipping the light switch on and off 3 times before I go in the room. That's just something in my head. You know what I mean?
No, that totally makes sense.
But great question. Is that Ronan?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
First of all, I am not a student of Roman philosophy or
okay.
But I fell into listening to some of your podcasts and some guests. You were a guest on a couple of podcasts that I was listening to, and the Stoicism, I guess I had unintentionally been practicing it for a long time.
Okay.
I did a stint in the military, and some of the things that, the being prepared, pre-planning, and amore fati kind of bled in to my life, instinctually, I guess, or
sure,
led into it. For example, I was prepared to have a lot of noises, unintentionally on this Zoom call like yesterday. So I was already prepared for it just in case that happened. I was going to be shaken. But recently I've been having some kind of like, how would your Stoicism system kind of deal with people making, like judging people with my own value system and how to manage. I guess I don't really have high expectations for other people, but trying to deal with, like, you know, whether it's, you know, people you used to work with that, you know, when a crisis happens, you tend to see the true nature of people, and
Sure.
this year's kind of set that up, and I'm trying to deal with some of that.
It's a great question. I mean, I think the last year is going to be hard to put some of this stuff back in the box, right? We've sort of seen how people that we know, whether it's politically or sort of medically, we now know, like, oh, hey, I thought me and this person were on the same page, and it turns out, you know, they're fucking nuts. Like, not just nuts, but like also awful, right? So I think it is tough. You know, social media, unfortunately, gives you a glimpse into people's lives that maybe it'd be, you know, we talked about being deliberately deaf earlier. It's hard to be deliberately deaf when people are screaming this stuff into your feed. So it is tough. I like Mark Aurelius's line about sort of be tolerant with others, strict with yourself, right? So you have your standards, but the operative word there is your standards, right? Like, they're your standards, and it's not fair to hold other people to a set of standards that they never asked for, right? They never said, here's the standard that I hold themselves up to. So they're not being a hypocrite, right? But it's tough. I just try to remind myself, like, look, I am falling short in enough ways myself that I've got more than I could possibly deal with, like, here, than to go around trying to you know, monitor other people.
So and it's not like I totally agree with that. I've really enjoyed finding you, first of all.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think I've always believed in, you know, like my standards are not necessarily realistic for anyone else but myself. But I'm just like, man, when people really fall short of anything close to the same value system that you have, you know, and this, I guess, is going back to, you know, Seneca working with Nero, you know.
Yeah.
It's like,
no, you get
at that point, like, Jesus, you know.
You get the sense reading Marcus Aurelius that he has very low expectations for other people, and yet he's constantly disappointed, right? Which I think is sort of just a fact of human life, that, like, you're not expecting anything of these people, and still they manage to surprise you, right? So yeah, I think realizing that, you know, one, that's a vice, realizing two, that's a recipe for misery, and two, that it's inherently unfair, but that's what you signed up for, you know. Right? You signed up for it, so all you can do is try to carry your load, and maybe try to carry other people's load if you're strong enough, but you can't go around resenting people for not carrying the same load as you.
So have you, on a personal level, found that there are people that you just kind of phased out?
Of course. Yeah, definitely. And I think if you're not, like, I'm not saying that you're sort of too good for people, but if your social group or your sort of friends are not growing, that's probably a sign that you're not growing. You know what I mean? If you're not progressing, that's probably, you know, that's probably going to be reflected in the company that you keep.
I think that was a really helpful way to explain it.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's why you're a writer.
Billy, what else have we got from the chat?
Let's see here. There's been a few about sort of the desire to, I guess, similar along Ronan's lines there of maybe when people are, you get the sense that they maybe would take to some of your advice. Like, when is it okay to step in and provide them with with some of the stuff you've learned and want to share with them.
I forget which Stoic writer was saying this, but the Stoics have like sort of what's up to us and then what's not up to us, right? But they were saying that's actually probably a little bit simple because there's also stuff in the middle, which is things that we have influence over. And I think this is true for people, friends, family members, right? You can't make anyone do anything. You can't make people love you. You can't make people change. You can't force them to want anything that they don't want from themselves or for themselves. But you can try to help, right? You can lead a horse to water. You can't make them drink, but you can lead a horse to water. And I think that's, to me, if you're trying to look most charitably at Seneca and his association with Nero, that's what you see. Seneca is trying over and over again. This guy has power for reasons that Seneca had no influence over, that Seneca, outside of assassination, cannot change. How can he try to be of service to not just Nero, but to Rome as much as possible within the constraints of his own ethics? And when I had H.R. McMaster on the podcast, he was saying the same thing. He was like, look, I'm inherently an apolitical person. He's like, I don't even vote. I didn't like Donald Trump, but I felt like I had national security expertise. And insofar as I could provide that expertise, that was my job. I couldn't force anyone to listen. So I thought that was an interesting way to think about it. You could push back and you could say McMaster should have done X, Y, and Z. You could push back and say, but Seneca could have done something about Nero. But I at least understand the logic there of like, I don't control this either way, but I'm going to try to have a positive influence. Let's do Phil.
Hey, thanks for calling on me, Ryan.
Of course.
I'm really happy I got to join this one. I'm at work and I've been kind of going back and forth. But
oh, awesome.
But thanks for having me. I heard about you. Somebody, I think it was on ESPN, was talking about Nick Saban and Bill Belichick being fans of Obstacle of the Way. So I went out and got a copy, and I love it. So my question, you kind of actually answered it earlier, but somebody had mentioned the similarities between Buddhism and Stoicism. I'm seeing a lot of similarities between Stoicism and 12-step literature in recovery. One major difference that I see is the idea of the will.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So in Stoicism, it seems like you need a strong will.
Yes.
You need to be diligent. You need to be, on top of your every action, where in 12-step, it's the idea of the will is what gets us into problems, right? And we have to turn our will over. So is turning the will over in Stoicism just a dedication to the four virtues?
I think, that's an interesting question. And I think it's complicated, right? I definitely get the idea in both in Buddhism and in 12-step, the sort of the willful will, your sort of sense that you're the center of the universe, that this is all about you, that is what gets us into trouble. At the same time, I would argue the Stoics probably agree with that. And I say this in Obstacle, when we think about will, we often think willpower, but I think for the Stoics, a big part of will was that idea of acceptance, of sort of accepting one's powerlessness over a situation and bringing your willpower to the endurance side of things rather than the assertion side of things. So I think they're probably more aligned than it might seem.
I mean, there's some phrases that just jump out at me. Progress, not perfection. The Serenity Prayer is straight out of the four virtues, it sounds like, which is amazing.
Definitely is.
All right. Well, thank you.
Of course. No, thank you. Let's do, maybe we can do one more. Ryan.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, cool. Well, I think this was covered a little bit earlier. You were talking about the easiest way to kind of get into those deep work states, those flow kind of states, is doing what you like. But obviously, in like pursuit of doing the things you love, you're going to run into things that you don't like doing. So like, I'm sure
Sure.
you love running the Daily Stoic and doing your writing, but I'm sure you deal with like suppliers or whatever, and maybe like
Yeah.
the business side of things isn't your favorite part or something. I'm just spitballing. For
Sure.
me, like being a student, like I love learning about some of these things I do, but then I may have to take a course that I don't really like.
Sure.
And so how do you like still do that deep work when it's not something you want to do? Because obviously there's going to be times like that.
Yeah, I did a video about this, I think over the weekend, that was helpful to me. I first heard the phrase from Tim Ferriss. I don't know if he invented it or not, but the idea is like sort of make before you make before you manage. And so to me, the idea is like, I do the creative sort of flow oriented tasks first, and then I do the other stuff later. Right. So like sort of, I try to think about it as like the first half of the day is for the creative stuff. The second half of the day is for the administrative stuff. So that I don't want to burn myself out and then have to go do the important thing. I want to have already done the important stuff, because if the administrative task takes an extra day, so be it. But if I'm putting off the important stuff, maybe I'll never get that moment again.
All right. Yeah, that's helpful. I appreciate it.
Let's do Renee, and then we'll call it for today, and we'll do office hours one more time whenever that is.
Great. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
I was introduced to you a while ago with Stillness. A bunch of us at work were reading it, and then it took me into a bunch of your other books. And
oh, awesome.
I've read some of the novels you recommended, like Hurricane and The Banana King, and I'm reading A Man in Full right now. You've got the sessions here now. We've got a couple of emails that come out every morning. And literally for the past few days, I've had a headache, and I'm wondering, like, I think it's information overload. I'm eating up a lot of, I'm loving it, but I'm also finding it's too much right now. And so any advice on how to pare back? I don't want to get burnt out, but I think I need to pare back. But you provide so much content at the same time. You know, it's like, how do we pick and choose, and what do you do? A lot of your chapters are short chapters, so I think you know that's intentional. So some advice here, please. Yeah.
So it's a great question. All the stuff I put out is not really supposed to be consumed by one person, right? So the idea is that different people consume in different mediums. Some people like video, some people like audio, some people like email, some people like books. The idea is I put a lot of stuff out there, and I hope that people, a small percentage of it reaches each person, right? So definitely pick and choose what you like, what fits into your life, what is the medium that's most conducive to your learning. But I would say I get to that place too, where there's just too much, you're too busy, you're fried, you're realizing the retention is not there. I think the best thing you do there is you step back, you take a minute, and you allow yourself to recover. This goes to the point we're talking about as far as recovery goes, right? If you're not resting and recovering, you're probably at some point of diminishing return. So I definitely think about that. Although I heard a good piece of advice the other day where someone was saying, like, if you ever get to a place where you're too tired to do anything but scroll on your phone or watch TV, you should go to sleep. Like, the point is to go to sleep, not to just stay up and do more mindless activities, but to go to sleep. So usually when I find myself at that place, I try to remind myself, like, this is probably even deeper than just like not reading. This is like, I'm not taking care of myself, and I need to like literally go to bed and start over the next day or the next week or whatever.
I wonder how many people are actually struggling with that now, because I do. The number of times my kids wake me up on the couch, or my light's still on in my room, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Totally. So. Awesome. Well, guys, this was great. I'm excited. We're going to do one more. Billy, can you give the details of the last call just one more time in case anyone misses?
Yeah, the last one's on Sunday, same time, 2 p.m. Central Time. And we'll put out links in the next few emails.
All right, guys, we'll see you on Sunday, and the archive of this will be in tomorrow's email, and we'll talk soon.